Demi Lovato is monetizing her struggle, and I'm not here for it. So first I would like to say that I truly do empathize with Demi Lovato. Like, she's clearly experienced a lot of pain, and I don't want to take away from the traumatic experiences that she's had. Instead, this video is focusing on more so how she's going about sharing that story. It feels less like her trying to be transparent and trying to help people through her experience, and more so capitalizing on a negative thing that happened. And I will go about talking through this video in the parts that she released her documentary in. But before that, I would like to say I felt like it was a little bit icky when she joined the bandwagon of the BetterHelp app. Like, for me, it feels like that movement in itself is a bit frustrating, because I don't believe that these celebrities that are promoting the BetterHelp app have ever used it. I feel like if they were asked any questions about how the app worked or basic functionalities of the app, they wouldn't be able to answer, because I truly just don't believe that they're using that app to find a therapist. Like, I just don't believe that. But if you want to give her the benefit of the doubt and say she used the app to find her therapist and her help team, okay, let's go ahead and live in that fantasy world where we think that's true. But that was the first thing that annoyed me about all this. But second, moving again to the Dancing with the Devil documentary, I'll talk about it in the parts that it was released in. The premiere, I actually watched this last. I watched this interview after I watched the 4-part series. And with that said, what was brought up was the phrase open book with boundaries. And since again I saw the 4-part series, I felt like that wasn't true. Like, the series seemed very controlled. Like, it just seemed like a very controlled narrative. And another thing that was said was Demi was talking about how her friends feel that the world will finally get to see her personality. Like, that didn't feel true to me. For me, when I was watching it, it felt like her business strategy was very apparent. Like, it just feels like she's trying to attach herself to as many woke groups as possible, like gender fluid, and then the way that she talked about the different negative things that she experienced, it seemed like she was wearing it as an identity. Like, it's one thing to talk about your problem with addiction, with sexual assault, with eating disorders, but when it's talked about in a way where you're almost proud to wear that as a badge, because now you have another reason why your life is so much harder than everyone else. Like, the victim mentality, like, to be happy to be a victim because now you have an excuse for, I don't know, like, giving a reason to have people think that you deserve an easier life because you've struggled in the past. Like, to kind of be held on a pedestal, it's just very frustrating. And then there was a brief moment where they talked about Black Lives Matter, which that was the point where I really thought, okay, come on, like, you're really trying to get all the woke groups on your side. And yeah, that was the point where I really felt validated in thinking that, because it was just mentioned very briefly. Like, it was like a very short minute or two snippet, and I think it was tied to one of her songs, where before the snippet of the song was played, she was shown talking about how she wants to talk about things that no one's talking about, and it's really important through her music to address important issues. But it's like, you're not putting your neck out there by supporting Black Lives Matter right now. Like, maybe when it first started, I can see how celebrities might have felt a little unsure whether they wanted to publicly support it or not, because there was still Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter and all that. But now it's pretty, like, expected of celebrities to support Black Lives Matter. And that's not to say that they shouldn't. Like, I really appreciate that. But if you're going to support it and say that it's an important cause, then give it the time and respect that it deserves, not like a minute or two very quickly add that to your documentary to make sure all bases are covered. Okay, so that's a lot that I said about the premiere. But for the first part of the documentary, what I have written down is she first starts off by saying that she's going to just talk, and then whatever she doesn't want in it, she's going to take out, or they can have an option of taking it out or something along those lines. And again, that's not being an open book. Like, if you're going to edit things out because you don't feel like sharing it, that's fine, but don't say you're being an open book when you're not. And something that I didn't mention about the premiere is she mentioned in that interview that if she feels like she wants to share more later on in a book or another documentary or whatever, she'll do that then, which is fine. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your whole story now, that's your prerogative, but don't say you're being an open book, because if you're editing things out, you're not being an open book. Like, that just seems pretty self-explanatory to me, but I guess it's not common sense. I don't know. That's just frustrating. So another thing that I want to say is I mentioned a little bit about this in the premiere video, like the interview segment that they did. It just felt very controlled. Like, I already said that, but I really want to emphasize that it just felt like a very controlled narrative. And I say this because whenever they show the different interviews of like her friends or former employees, there are many times where they looked at the camera and said, oh, are we actually talking about this? Oh wait, can I actually talk about this? Which felt weird to me, that they felt that they had to check in multiple times. Like, it wasn't like they just said it once and then never again throughout the documentary. Like, they kept asking throughout the different parts whether they were allowed to talk about it or not. So it really makes me question what they were told before they headed into the interview, because they also mentioned in the 2018 documentary that was shelved, but parts of it are showed in this, that that documentary was not very honest, and it just seemed like they went into this documentary interviews thinking that they were being held to the same expectation of not being fully honest. Like, they just seemed afraid to just fully tell the truth. So that was my main takeaway of the part one. Part two of the series, this is not on Demi, but I feel like this still needs to be said. Why the hell did the head of security not instruct people to call 911? Why was it the former assistant who stepped outside on her own the one to call 911? And why was she afraid to lose her job to do that? And why was it questioned whether or not sirens should be used? It was clearly a life or death matter. Like, that, again, that's not on Demi, but I just felt like that needed to be said. I'm sure a lot of people watching that hopefully are thinking that. And it was also weird. This also reminds me that certain people had their interviews with Demi right next to them. So the head of security, Demi was sitting right next to him. The doctor, I think it was the neurologist that worked on her, but I might be wrong, but it was one of the doctors that helped her after her overdose. Demi was sitting right next to him. Like, it just felt like she was right there to make sure certain things weren't shared. Like, why do you have to babysit these different people? Like, they should be able to speak for themselves without you just like over their shoulders. If this is supposed to be an open book, then what are you worried about? And then another thing that I would like to point out, I noticed this in the interview and part one of this, but I really felt this after the second part. I was just like, it feels like she's not talking very authentically. Like, it feels like she has a specific image in her head that she wants to portray for the public, and she wants the public to think that that's the reality of who she is and of how her situation unfolded. It just doesn't feel very conversational. It doesn't feel like, again, she's being an open book. It feels like she has in her head what she wants people to think, and she wants the documentary to make that happen. And then for the third part of the documentary, this really highlighted something that I haven't said quite yet, that it feels like she doesn't take accountability for her actions. I saved that for this part so like that I can have a concrete example to support that. And that's with her friend Demi Vitali. I don't know if I'm pronouncing her last name right, but hearing the story really pissed me off. The fact that the public, the media, made it seem like Danny was responsible for Demi's overdose, for her relapsing, and that's just not fair. And the thing that pisses me the most off about this is the fact that before Danny's interview, or maybe it was right after, you see Demi talking to Danny and saying, feel free to tell the truth, just say everything. I don't want you to hold back. This is really your time to tell your story. And then you see Danny saying, I love you so much, thank you. And then when you hear the story, it's just like, it just feels very patronizing the way that Demi was talking to Danny about that. Because, let me just talk about it. Danny was saying that she lost a lot of teaching jobs and she lost artists. I don't know what Danny does, but her work really took a hit because the public believed that she was at fault for Demi's relapse and for Demi's overdose. And she was talking about how that really hurt her and just went into detail about that. And then immediately after, you see Demi talking about how she didn't really take into account how her overdose affected the people closest to her, and that basically she was just saying, people were hurt by it, but I wasn't ready to talk about it to the public, and then just kind of moves on, which is bullshit to me. Like, take ownership of the fact that you let your friend hang out to dry. Like, you could have easily just put out a tweet just as eagerly as you go after froyo places. Like, come on. If you didn't hear about the froyo thing, look up Demi Lovato, froyo, you're welcome. But it's just ridiculous. Like, she was having this hard time caused by you relapsing, which you can come up with different reasons for why the relapse happened. But at the end of the day, you chose to do drugs again. And I know it's a disease and I know it's something that is difficult to combat, but take ownership of the fact that someone who had nothing to do with your overdose, someone who had nothing to do with you relapsing, is getting negative consequences in their life because of your actions. So, like, the very least that you could have done is say, Danny, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I was wrong to let you take the blame publicly for my mistakes. Like, the fact that she didn't say that at all, she did not take accountability at all for that situation. And I also want to add that Danny was getting death threats. And the way that Demi referred to this behavior of her fans doing death threats, making her lose her jobs and all the other negative consequences that Danny faced, Demi referred to this as a little out of line. That's more than a little out of line. Like, take accountability for the way that you did not support your friends, and then to throw a pity party for yourself, making it seem like the world doesn't support you because of the negative things that they say. You're a public figure. Like, a part of that is you're gonna have trolls post negative things. Like, it comes with the territory. Just don't pay it mind. And I'm not saying that that's easy. I haven't experienced that myself, but at some point you need to realize that with the life that you have, with all the privileges that you have, which among that is a wellness team that had at least 3 to 4 people. It's like head of security, a rehab person, a therapist, or maybe those 2 were the same. But basically, she has a lot of people in her court supporting her sobriety, supporting her depression, supporting her anxiety, supporting all these things that a lot of people don't have. Like, there are a lot of people out there who don't even have someone to text to check in on them, just normal, without adding in the mental health issues. And she talks about being aware of the privilege that she has, but it really doesn't feel that way. It feels like she thinks her life is so much harder than everyone else in the world, and she should just be the poster child of struggle and heartache, which again, I'm not saying that she hasn't struggled, and I'm not saying that she hasn't experienced heartache, and I'm not saying that she hasn't experienced traumatic pain, but acknowledge that you have a lot of resources that a lot of people don't have. And I know that she says that in the documentary, so I'm not saying that she hasn't said these words. It just doesn't feel like she means it when she says it. Because even when she's performing different songs, like there was a part after she made a performance, like she was like talking to the audience about, if you're struggling, and like giving advice or something like that. But that also felt very not authentic. Like it just felt like she was doing this voice because she couldn't naturally cry. So it seemed like a very forced, sad crying voice, and it just feels very manipulative. And then something that I'll have to say about the victim mentality point that I'm trying to make is when she's talking about her engagement. She acknowledges that she was with a guy for 4 to 5 months before they got engaged and said that it was false advertisement. I'm sorry, but if you're with someone for 4 or 5 months and you realize that they're with you to become famous, first of all, you're Demi Lovato. You're super famous. You have to have that in the back of your mind that when people date you, there's a possibility that they're dating you for fame. Like, you didn't just become famous yesterday. You've been famous for long enough for you to realize that you need to vet through people who want to date you for that reality or for that possibility. With that said, 4 to 5 months, even if you're not famous, you barely know a person. So if you realize in that time that there's someone who's different than who you thought they were when you first met them, that doesn't necessarily mean false advertisement. It's just you learned who the real person is because it takes time to learn who someone is. Like a part of meeting someone and the excitement is, you get excited and you have butterflies and you have this picture in your head of who you think they are, but it's not necessarily always that person's fault. So that's why people usually give it some time to date and get to know someone before committing to marriage. Is because you're trying to get to know them as best as you can before making that commitment. So to say just because you got to know them and that getting to know them ended up being disappointing because it's not the image, like they didn't meet up to the image that you had of them, it's not false advertisement. Or if you want to argue with me about this and say it can possibly be false advertisement, that's fine. I get it. But the thing that really bothered me about this is she was talking to her friends and she was just like, this was in the middle of COVID. I didn't have my friends to help me. I didn't have all this stuff and making excuses. And it seemed like she was dramatizing what happened. It's just like you were in a relationship that failed. Like a lot of people are in relationships that fail. Like, why are you making it seem like you're such a victim because of this? Like, that's a normal part of life that happens to everyone. And on that note, there are people in COVID who had no one to talk to. There's people in COVID that like had no social interactions at all. So like it just bothers me when people have so much to be grateful for and they're just choosing to just focus on the negative and take pride over victim mentality and just being a victim. And I know you can say in my channel, maybe I do that, but I honestly try to avoid doing that. Like there are times where I'm very open and vulnerable about having those thoughts, but I also take ownership of the fact that I work really hard to fight against that. Like I work really hard to be grateful for what I have and to acknowledge that I don't have the perfect life, but my life is a lot easier than a lot of people. And it's not to say that people should compare their lives to others, but it's more so to focus on counting your blessings and in terms of pain and trauma, working to overcome them and not making that a part of your identity. So I'm not encouraging at all for people to brush their problems under the rug, but it's more so to face them, like pull it out under the rug and really work on them so like that you can better yourself and live a happy life that you deserve rather than to wallow in pity and be proud of being a victim. And again, it's not to say that people should feel shame about being a victim or for being victimized in the past, but is to realize you are more than a victim. You deserve to live a life that allows you to be fully present, to be fully involved in the positives of what you do. Don't live under the shadow of the worst things that have ever happened to you in your life. You deserve more than that. And I just really feel that Demi Lovato and her documentary, they're just encouraging the opposite. It just really feels like she wants the world to know she is fragile, and because of that, it feels like she wants the world to fully adjust so like that life would be easier for her. So like that she doesn't have to deal with any triggers, or she doesn't have to work at all to integrate back into the world. And I feel like that's just not realistic. Like I understand, especially with my experiences as well, with PTSD, I have certain triggers, but I don't expect the world to fully change around me so like that I don't have to experience those triggers ever. Like I realize that I have to work on myself so like that I can face those triggers and still be able to function in society. It just really feels like Demi Lovato finds strength in weakness. Like it feels like any way that she can identify as a victim, she's gonna take advantage of. And that might rub people the wrong way that I said that, but watch the documentary. Please watch it and tell me that it doesn't feel like she's taking pride for all of her weak moments. And with all that said, please share with me in the comments your viewpoints of Demi Lovato's documentary and what she's sharing with the public. And even if you disagree with me, please let me know in the comments. I'm interested to see all opinions on this. Thank you so much for watching my video. If you would like to further support my content, please go to patreon.com/yourfriendjanellis to become a member of my Patreon. As you may know, Patreon is a way for fans to support the content that they love on a monthly basis. Members of my Patreon enjoy the exclusive benefits of a chat community, live streams, and guaranteed access to me via direct messaging. By supporting my Patreon, you're allowing me to dedicate the time and effort necessary to create, edit, and upload new videos on a weekly basis. Thank you so much for your support, and I appreciate you all.